I was not originally going to make this video, but I have watched a lot of Christian nationalists attack everybody else over the past month. This includes other Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and pagans in general. I am tired of watching a bunch of white Christian men attack everybody else in this country. Therefore, I have decided to counterattack. Because if something isn't done to change course, then America is going to disappear within the next 5 years. It will not be recognizable. If I don't start speaking out, then I will regret it later. Most right-wing pagans are focused on Islam right now, so Christian nationalism is going under the radar. However, my state doesn't have an Islamic problem. It has a Christian nationalist problem. So this is what I am going to focus on. I have decided to start off with a strong counterattack and talk about why the Bible is pagan. Most people are probably aware that Yahweh is the God of the Bible, but there are two different Yahwehs in the Bible. The Bible has a monotheistic version of Yahweh and a pagan version of Yahweh. The monotheistic version of Yahweh was created sometime between the 2nd century BCE and the 6th century BCE. Dr. Jonathan Adler has argued that there isn't any archaeological evidence for the Jewish people following Torah law until the 2nd century BCE, which suggests to me that the idea of a monotheistic Yahweh is closer to 2nd century BCE than it is 6th century BCE. However, the mainstream narrative has monotheistic Yahweh being closer to the 6th century BCE. I am pointing this out, but it ultimately does not matter, because 70 to 75% of the Bible takes place before the 6th century BCE, and this includes all of the Old Testament. The Yahweh that was around before the 6th century is pagan Yahweh. This means that the Bible is about pagan Yahweh and not monotheistic Yahweh. The Israelites were forced to preserve the pagan and polytheistic Yahweh in the Bible because Yahweh lost to the Moabite god Chemosh in 840 BCE. We have evidence for this outside of the Bible with the Mesha Stele. This is not something that could be brushed under the rug. Myth Vision recently put out a video on this topic, and I highly recommend watching it. Monotheistic Yahweh cannot lose to anything, because that would require a god more powerful than him. But pagan Yahweh could lose to other gods, because pagan gods can be defeated. In fact, pagan gods were defeated all the time in the ancient world. This is something you should already know as a pagan, but I don't think most Christians know this. The biblical monotheistic Yahweh is more like a slime that is wearing the face of pagan Yahweh. This is how I look at it. The biblical authors are giving powers to monotheistic Yahweh, powers that pagan Yahweh does not possess, and they are arguing that monotheistic Yahweh is doing everything in the Bible, even though the Bible is clearly and transparently about pagan Yahweh. Most of the Bible takes place before monotheistic Yahweh was even a concept. Unfortunately, this creates a major theological problem for Christian nationalists. Pagan Yahweh was likely just a warrior god. He was not a water god. He was not a creator god. He was not a god of love or a god of law. He was just a warrior god at best. So Yahweh created Adam and Eve, right? No. Pagan Yahweh cannot create anything. And it would have been pagan Yahweh during the Adam and Eve story, not monotheistic Yahweh. Monotheistic Yahweh can create life because he was merged with the god El. And El was the creator god in the Canaanite pantheon. But again, the Old Testament, where the Adam and Eve story takes place, is about pagan Yahweh, not monotheistic Yahweh. The same applies for Noah's flood. Christians will tell you that God flooded the world, but this isn't the case. Because the Yahweh that was around during the flood myth was pagan Yahweh. This Yahweh does not have power over water. The monotheistic Yahweh can cause a flood because he was merged with the Canaanite god Yam. Yam was a water god. He could control seas, rivers, lakes, and underground springs. I know there will be a lot of angry Christians arguing that Yahweh is an evil god, and he's not their god. But that opinion is irrelevant, because Yahweh is the canonical God of the Bible. Slapping the Old Testament onto the New Testament and calling it canon wasn't very thought out by the Catholics. But if you take away the Old Testament, then you really have nothing as a Christian. I'm sorry, you still have something. You have Paul. The same Paul that has so little faith in God that he took a boat ride to Rome that was protected by the Greek Gemini twins. Christians will argue that Jesus is God, and that is correct. Jesus is God. But this causes a problem. Is he monotheistic Yahweh or pagan Yahweh? If Jesus is the real God of the Bible, then that would make him pagan Yahweh. The problem is that he wouldn't be able to do most of what he did in the Bible. Jesus was able to take over Hades, raise people from the grave, and be resurrected due to monotheistic Yahweh getting merged with Mot. Pagan Yahweh doesn't have any of these abilities. This means that you either believe in the real Jesus, which would be pagan Yahweh, or the fake Jesus that could perform all these miracles with the fake monotheistic Yahweh. The best part of this whole topic is biblical archaeology. Biblical archaeology does not confirm monotheistic Yahweh or Jesus. It confirms pagan Yahweh and Jesus. Anything older than 6th century BCE is pagan Yahweh territory. Stuff related to the Old Testament is pagan Yahweh. This includes Abraham, Moses, and Solomon. Of course, pagan Yahweh doesn't have the power to do the things in these stories. The Israelites gave monotheistic Yahweh's powers to pagan Yahweh in the Bible. The real pagan Yahweh didn't do these things because he could not do them. He did not have the power to help Moses split the Red Sea. The Bible is very pagan, whether you believe in monotheistic Yahweh or pagan Yahweh. You are still believing in a pagan God because monotheistic Yahweh is more pagan than pagan Yahweh due to how syncretic he is. But the Bible is a Timu version of Christian paganism. Authentic Christian paganism is Gnostic Christianity. Authentic Christian paganism is Christo-paganism. But the whole purpose of this video is to point out the fact that the Bible is pagan. It belongs to pagans. If there are pagans that want to claim the Bible as their own, then they should do it. I'm not saying you must do it, but this is how we start fighting back, by making this fact known. Modern Christians and Jews do not follow the real biblical God. They do not follow the real pagan Yahweh that lost to Chemosh in 840 BCE. They follow monotheistic Yahweh, the fake God that was created between the 2nd and 6th centuries BCE. Thanks for listening. Have a fantastic day or night.